Hey y'all, um, I hope y'all doing okay. Staying safe, being good to yourself. I'm back with another video because I got some thoughts in my mind. In my last video, I mentioned that I'd probably make my next video about the Yamnaya people. Sorry, y'all. There's something else that I came to my mind that I want to discuss. In my previous videos, here and there, I mentioned why DNA haplogroups and their possible connections with biblical nations. In this video, I'll dive more into this topic, giving you guys a clearer picture of my opinions concerning biblical nations and their possible Y-DNA haplogroups. Of course, I can't cover every single opinion of mine in this one video, because if I did, the video would become like 10 hours long, and I ain't trying to hurt your guys' ears like that. So do keep in mind that I have multiple theories, but in this video, I'll be discussing a little bit of my top theory concerning why DNA haplogroups and the biblical nations that they might represent. So before I start, let me tell you guys what I think right off the bat. My top theory maintains that Y-DNA haplogroup A, B, C, D, and E are all Hamitic, and Y-DNA haplogroups F, G, H, I, and J are all Shemitic. And lastly, but not least, Y-DNA haplogroup K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, and T are all Japhetic. This is my top theory. In my opinion, I think this breakdown is most likely correct out of all my theories. Therefore, I'll be attempting to prove this, or at least describe why I think this. All right, y'all, let's play ball. In my top theory, the descendants of the biblical character named Ham are represented by the Y-DNA haplogroups A, B, C, D, and E. They are the Afro-Asiatics, aka the early civilization builders. That's what I call them. I call Y-DNA haplogroups A through E the Afro-Asiatics, who are the early civilization builders. Hamites, especially groups descended from Mizrahim, Cush, and Canaan, are often described as the first to build cities, civilizations, and kingdoms. For example, Canaanite city-states, Babylon, and Egypt. These haplogroups correlate to early Y-DNA clades, or these Hamitic sons, to me, correlate to Y-DNA clades such as A, B, C, D, and E, which are ancient, deep-rooted, and often the first in the region, especially in Africa. Also the Near East and early South Asia, because remember, you have Hindu Kush over there. But over time, these lineages declined in dominance. They were outnumbered or conquered or absorbed by incoming lineages. Hence the reason most of the royal families in our day and age are not from the Y-DNA haplogroups A, B, C, D, or E. This reinforces the notion that the Hamites were displaced and or overtaken in political, religious, or cultural influence. However, this does not mean that no Hamites have the power to oppress others, or that none of them are in a position to trample upon another nation today. For many Hamites are included among powerful nations that are against Israel. For instance, in Psalms chapter 83, verse 2 through 11, it says, and I quote, "Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, the tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asshur also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jaban, at the brook of Kizon, which perished at Endor. They became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeeb, yea, all their princes as Ziba and as Zalmunna." End quote. In this portion of this psalm, you clearly see Hamites as the Philistines. You clearly see Hamites such as the Philistines and inhabitants of Tyre listed among those who have formed a confederacy against God's people. Verse 11 in this psalm even identifies these people as nobles. Therefore, these pagan nations, which include some Hamites, are fighting against God's people. Interestingly enough, although the Y-DNA haplogroup E is not the most prevalent among the royal families of today, it's still present among some of them. Seeing that this is so, I argue that this Y-DNA haplogroup E could then represent some of the Hamites who are still in power and who are part of the confederacy that was formed against God's people. Remember, the Hamites are the foundation builders. They are the pioneers of civilization. They were the first city builders, especially in Africa and the Near East. For instance, the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. Nimrod also founded the first Assyrian monarchy, and many scholars and historians believe that Nimrod actually founded Nineveh and was the king of Assyria at a point in time. The Canaanites founded independent Canaanite city-states and established the early cities of Canaan. Mizraim and his children migrated to Africa from the east, as well as Put and his children, both establishing Egypt and Libya respectively. Thus, so far, we can see here how Y-DNA haplogroup A, B, and E not only match these migration patterns, but also dwelt and thrived in these regions long before Y-DNA haplogroup R, J, and others did. And let me remind you, Africa and parts of Asia were given as lands to the children of Ham. Hence, Y-DNA haplogroup E dominating Egypt, which is, of course, the land of Ham, and also Y-DNA haplogroup E dominating the land of Canaan initially, before they were invaded by Shemitic foreigners who eventually became the dominant force on that land. Let me remind you all that the Shemites, Hamites, and Japhetites were in their own lands once they spread out to the regions they settled, according to the Hebrew Bible. Genesis chapter 10, verse 20, and I quote, "These are the sons of Ham, after their families, after their tongues, in their countries, and in their nations." End quote. Notice how many people overlook this verse or ignore it. I have noticed that whenever I bring this verse up to people, they become silent or they ignore it altogether. To add to this, the earliest Y-DNA haplogroups of India seem to be either Y-DNA haplogroup C or D. And Godfrey Higgins, a Freemasonic author of the book called Anacalypsis, informs us that the ancient Phoenicians were Hindus. You can find this information on page 58 of Anacalypsis, volume 1. In Anacalypsis, page 54, it says, Godfrey Higgins states, and I quote, Dr. Wells states that the Ethiopians of Africa alone are commonly called Ludim, both by ancient and modern writers, but the country east of the Euphrates was called Cush, as well as the country west of it, thus giving the capital of Persia, Susan or Susiana, which was said to be built by Memnon, to the Cushites or Ethiopians as well as Arabia. End quote. Memnon was seen as a Hamite by many scholars. Whenever they talk about Memnon, they mention Memnon as an Ethiopian or as a Hamite. The previous quote that I just read to y'all shows us that the Ethiopians of African are called Ludim, and that east of the Euphrates lied a country called Cush. And it just so happens that the name Hindu Kush exists in the east as well. Not a coincidence. So if the early civilizers of India are Kushites or Phoenicians, and if Y-DNA haplogroup C is either the first or second Y-DNA haplogroup to inhabit India, then to me, this raises the chances of Y-DNA haplogroup C also being Hamitic. The point is that Y-DNA haplogroup C is one of the earliest haplogroups to go into India. That's my main point. And that the Hamites were seen as the earliest settlers of India, the Hamites and Shemites. They especially speak about the Hamites being early settlers of India because they connected to Kush. Plus, many Dravidians have Y-DNA haplogroup C, and a lot of them have what people would refer to as Cushitic physical characteristics. The dark skin, the wide nose, sometimes the woolly hair. It's very possible that much of the Ethiopians with even straighter hair or straight hair have this type of hair due to factors such as radiation, ultraviolet exposure, chemical exposure, weather, environmental influences, and autosomal genetics affecting their hair texture. Seriously, do you guys actually think that throughout world history, throughout the whole span period of the Earth's life, not one Hamite had straight or straighter hair? Not one? Like really, not one. Throughout our entire existence, not one Hamite had straight hair. I don't know if I can say that not one Hamite had straight hair. I don't know about that, guys. According to Gerald Fleury, the context of Ezekiel chapter 38, verse 5, the descendants of Cush and Put are found in India. According to Gerald Fleury, he thinks that the descendants of Cush and Put are found in India and what is now Pakistan. So this reinforces what I've been telling you guys. To this end, the Syriac, Chaldee, and Arabic versions frequently render that term Kush as India or Indians. I don't know if you guys have read different Bible versions, but the Syriac, Chaldee, and Arabic versions of the text, it refers to Kush as Indians. And like I'm saying, haplogroup C is one of the earliest haplogroups over in India. And then a lot of the Dravidians had haplogroup C. A lot of the haplogroup C carriers over in India had dark skin, such as the Australian Aborigines. They had dark skin. Some of them have curly hair, straighter hair, woolly hair. But they definitely have Hamitic characteristics. Look at the nose, look at the mouth, look at the shape of the skull, look at their faces, look at their color. Dark skin, dark brown, approaching black or light brown, you name it. And like I said before, the early Indians of India included Y-DNA haplogroup C. The earliest Indians of India, according to many sources, was not from the children of Japheth, but rather from the children of Ham and Shem. The Japhetic people came to India later. That's why you hear about the Indo-Aryans invading India later. Look, in my opinion, this is not a coincidence. This hints at the Kushites having traveled further east. This hints at the Kushites having traveled further east, contrary to popular opinion that Kush was only in Africa. As I stated before, the Hamites migrated from the east and went into Africa. This is important to know, for there are many people out there who claim that Y-DNA haplogroup E could not possibly be Hamitic due to its arising from a source outside of Africa. But little do they know that such an argument actually proves even more that Y-DNA haplogroup E is Hamitic, because the Hamites are coming from Asia. Guys, you need to understand that the Hamites are not only associated with Africa, okay? Honestly, the Hamites had legs too. They had legs, guys. I know it's probably surprising, but they had legs as well. And they have migrated outside of Africa, and they have migrated to Africa. They have legs, guys. Hamites are not only associated with Africa, and you Christians out there need to know that as well. Because a lot of you Christians like to say that Kush is only associated with Africa. You guys have it wrong. You have it wrong. I'm not trying to be mean or anything. I'm just telling you guys the truth. Okay, look, the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom is in the land of Shinar. Think about it, guys. The Hamites are coming from Asia, hence the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom being in the land of Shinar. Again, Godfrey Higgins says this on page 54 of his book, Anacalypsis, and I quote, volume 1, by the way, and I quote, Duckford gives an opinion that Homer and Herodotus are both right, and that there were two Ethiopias, and that the Africans came from India, end quote. Here we see that some scholars are of the opinion that Africans came from India, that is, from the Asian continent. Thus, if Y-DNA haplogroup DE is coming from the Asian continent, then its migrational pattern would literally match up with what Duckford is saying. And not just him, even Godfrey Higgins. Because a lot of black people want to say that, oh, Godfrey Higgins is talking about so-and-so being black, but they don't talk about the other things that Godfrey Higgins says. Godfrey Higgins tells us in his book Anacalypsis that Negroes or blacks are from India. They migrated into the African desert, where they eventually were called Lubim. Godfrey Higgins tells us in his book Anacalypsis that Negroes or blacks are coming from India, migrated into the African desert, where they eventually were called Lubim. Godfrey Higgins tells us this in his book. And Lubim are children of Mizraim. On page 54, Godfrey Higgins also states, and I quote, another ancient writer, Eustathius, also states that the Ethiopians came from India. These occurring accounts are scarcely be doubted. And here may be discovered the mode and time also when great numbers of ancient rites and ceremonics might be imported from India into Egypt. For that there was a most intimate relation between them in very ancient times cannot be doubted. Indeed, it is not doubted. The only question has been whether Egypt borrowed from India or India from Egypt. End quote. Think about it, y'all. Egypt is mostly populated with haplogroup E. This is where these Ethiopians are coming from. This is where these black people are coming from. The scholar just said that the Africans are actually coming from the Asian continent, from India. Godfrey Higgins is agreeing that the Ethiopians are coming from India. And now you have all these Habakkuk E people in Egypt, and people saying things like, oh, perhaps Habakkuk E originated outside of Africa, or perhaps Habakkuk DE originated outside of Africa. I'm telling y'all, these people are coming from outside of Africa. Now, which Y DNA would fit this quote that I just read? Think about it. Y DNA Habakkuk A and B were mostly staying in Africa. However, Y DNA Habakkuk DE or E were the Afro-Asiatic people who were undergoing more migrations throughout Asia than Y DNA Habakkuk A and B was. And these Y DNA Habakkuk DE or E carriers must have came from Asia, India, and other Asiatic regions and migrated to Egypt, bringing their knowledge over into Egypt from the regions of Asia. Hence the saying, Africans came from India and Ethiopians came from India. Godfrey Higgins, a very knowledgeable Freemasonic author, is telling you this. A Freemason who studies esoteric knowledge is telling you that the Ethiopians came from India into Egypt. He studies esoteric knowledge and he's telling you that the blacks and Negroes are coming from India, are coming from Asia, and that they were later called Lubim, which is a name of one of Mizraim's sons. They were called the Lubim. Godfrey Higgins also lists as his reference that Duckford claims that the Africans came from India. I hope y'all are following me. Whether you believe this or not, there are well-studied people out there who totally view history in a much different light than modern-day history. Again, on page 54, Godfrey Higgins says, and I quote, "There is not a particle of proof from any historical records known to the author that any colony ever passed from Egypt to India, but there is, we see, direct, positive historical evidence of the Indians having come to Africa." Guys, These are your Y-DNA haplogroup DE carriers and its subclades. I bet you guys, I bet. It has something to do with Y-DNA haplogroup DE, whether it's haplogroup E or D, has something to do with them. These Hamites are coming from the east. Okay? They are coming from the east. They did not start in Africa. The mainstream African story that they sell to us is a lie. All right, I can go on and on. There's so much more to dive into, but let me discuss some other haplogroups real quick. Now, I have made it clear that I believe that Y-DNA haplogroup A, B, C, D, and E are all hamitic. I know I was just like focusing on Y-DNA haplogroup D and E, but I still also have arguments as to why Y-DNA haplogroup A and B are hamitic as well. But like I told you guys before, I can't spend too much time on each and every haplogroup in this video because I'd end up making like a 10-hour video. And trust me, I have a lot more reasons why I think these haplogroups are hamitic. A lot more. So let me jump briefly into the other haplogroups. Now, Y-DNA haplogroups F, G, H, I, and J to me are Semitic. I believe that Y-DNA haplogroups F, G, H, I, and J are all Semitic haplogroups. I call this haplogroup, or I call this category of haplogroups, the Eastern Semitian people. Again, I call them the Eastern Semitian people, aka the theologians. The people from whom the Abrahamic faith originated from. Arising from the Eastern Semitian people was a cultural and religious dominance that swept across the world, inspiring many, revolutionizing civilizations, and leading multitudes of nations to awe or enlightenment. So that's a main point I want to get across, that the Eastern Semitian people, they they had a cultural and religious dominance that swept across the world, inspiring many people, okay, and causing movements of enlightenment, spiritual and or religious enlightenment. The Shemites, Arabs, Hebrews, Aramaeans, and Assyrians are said to have overtaken Hamitic groups in many areas, such as Canaan and Mesopotamia. Hence, the predominant prevalence of Y-DNA haplogroup J in Mesopotamia, Persia, and in the land of Canaan. I want you guys to think about this. You read all these sources or all these religious and biblical texts, and what type of people do they connect to Arabia? The Semitic people. They always talk about how the Semitic people are predominant in number in Arabia, how the Semitic people have a dominant culture in Arabia, how the Semitic people lead Arabia, how the religions there are of a Semitic origin. They always talk about and associate Arabia with Shem. They don't talk about Arabia being mostly dominated by Japheth, guys. They don't. They associate Arabia with Shem. And the top haplogroup there is J. Y-DNA haplogroups F, G, H, I, and J are dominant in the Middle East today, as well as H, I, and G, which radiate across the Middle East, India, and into Europe. Culturally, the religions and languages of the Shemites, such as Judaism and Islam, became globally dominant. In other words, the Shemites, one can say, gained religious and or spiritual ascendancy. even if the Shemites are not the largest in raw numbers. Many of these Shemites are associated with India, and rightfully so. Interestingly enough, Spencer Wells, who is an American geneticist, author, entrepreneur, anthropologist, and of the National Geographic Project, he is a leader of the National Geographic Project. I should say the leader. He led the National Geographic Project. This man, Spencer Wells, labeled Y-DNA haplogroup F as the haplogroup from which the Middle Eastern clan is derived from. You can find this information in his book titled Deep Ancestry Inside the Genographic Project. Also, on page 210 of this book, Spencer Wells also says that, and I quote, haplogroup G has three related brother haplogroups, H, I, and J. End quote. I find it interesting that instead of the famous geneticist Spencer Wells concluding that haplogroup G is related to all other Y-DNA haplogroups from G and onward, he comments that the Y-DNA haplogroups that are seen as brothers to Y-DNA haplogroup G is H, I, and J, rather than with Y-DNA haplogroup K, O, R, and others. So does he know something that we do not? Furthermore, on page 144 of his book, he has a haplogroup graph that depicts Y-DNA haplogroup F, G, H, I, and J grouped together as if these Y-DNA haplogroups are more so related to one another as opposed to being just as related to other Y-DNA haplogroups that come after Y-DNA haplogroup K or before Y-DNA haplogroup F. I just found that interesting. Seeing that my top theory proposes that Y-DNA haplogroup F, J, G, H, and I are all Semitic, and that Y-DNA haplogroup K through T are all Japhetic. It's been said that haplogroup F, also known as FM89, most likely originated in West Asia or even Southeast Asia, and that it has been suggested that its first expansion and rise to prevalence appears to have been in the Indian subcontinent, or at least somewhere near to it, or something like that. Many carriers of this haplogroup migrated to modern-day Iran and to the vast steppes of Central Asia. Other people from this group journeyed to Anatolia and the Balkans, trading familiar grasslands for forest and high country. Y-DNA haplogroup F is also another haplogroup that is considered to be one of the earliest that settled in India. In my opinion, this represents some Semitic Indians. Many Indians who carry Y-DNA haplogroup F or its early branches are dark-skinned, especially in indigenous and tribal populations. To me, this explains why some sources state that the Shemites were dark-skinned like the Hamites, and I think that people are overlooking this. Haplogroup F specifically, like haplogroup F occurs among Adivasi tribes in India. Adivasi, I think that's how you pronounce it. Adivasi. Yeah, I think it's Adivasi. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but it's spelled Adivasi. Yeah, so they tend to have darker skin, largely due to adaptation to tropical climates and little gene flow from later migrations associated with lighter skin variants. Remember, the oldest populations in India likely carried early forms of Y-DNA haplogroup F and had dark skin long before any Lighter skinned Alalis were introduced from Central Asia or Western Eurasia. Because remember, the Indo-Aryans came later. They came later, guys. I'm bringing this up because many people pretend as if Y-DNA haplogroup F, G, H, I, and J had no dark-skinned people. Therefore, they use this argument to justify why they cannot be Shemitic, since some sources do claim that the Shemites were dark-skinned. Okay, if we were to compare the religious values or cultural traditions of, let's say, Y-DNA haplogroup J carriers versus Y-DNA haplogroup R carriers, the hearts of their religious values differ from each other profoundly. For example, many Y-DNA haplogroup J carriers in Arabia prioritize Islam, community, the patriarchy, and the like, whereas Y-DNA haplogroup R carriers, in this day and age at least, tend to value more Western ideologies such as individualism, feminism, and gynocentrism. What I'm trying to get at is these two distinct groups of people differ from each other greatly, as if they are entirely two different people coming from separate foundation bloodlines, that is, one from Shem and the other from Japheth. Guys, there's a reason why I break up the Y-DNA haplogroup family tree like this. Remember, Y-DNA haplogroup AB is not monophyletic. In fact, it's not even a formally recognized haplogroup in modern genetic nomenclature. If we were to look at the Y-DNA haplogroup tree as it is, then Y-DNA haplogroup A would be from a different family than Y-DNA haplogroup B. In other words, the 4 different family lines would look something like this. Y-DNA haplogroup A is one family. Y-DNA haplogroup B is a second family. Y-DNA haplogroup CT is the third family from which CF and DE are derived from. But there are many people out there who even differentiate CF from DE. Thus, in total, this would be 5 family lines. However, Noah only had 3 sons. So, if one were to look at the Y-DNA haplogroup family tree in this manner, it just would not work. Hence the reason grouping Y-DNA haplogroups as AB, DE, and CF is not my top haplogroup theory. In terms of haplogroups, I look at them in terms of migration. Like whenever I think of haplogroups, I think of migration patterns, But anyhow, okay. So before I end this video, let me at least touch a little bit upon the Japhetic branch. My top theory maintains that Y-DNA haplogroup K through T represents all the Japhetic people. These are your Indo-Europeans, aka the kings of the north. Japheth is traditionally said to have spread the widest, especially into Europe and Asia, fulfilling the idea that God shall enlarge Japheth, mentioned in Genesis chapter 9, verse 27. So far, the meaning of the name Japheth arises from either 2 sources, one being may he extend, and the other beauty. Interestingly enough, in America, for example, white women or white people in general are usually seen as the standard for beauty. All you gotta do is look at Hollywood to understand what I just said right there. Regarding the Japhetic family, it is not secret that they specialized in global expansion and warfare. This aligns perfectly with the Y-DNA haplogroups K through T, such as Y-DNA haplogroup R1A and R1B conquering or colonizing vast areas of the whole world, Indo-Europeans, Scythians, Yamnaya, Germans, and Slavs can serve as an example for this. Plus, Y-DNA haplogroups O, Q, and N represent East Asia, Siberia, and the Americas. All in all, Japhetic peoples dominate in numbers today. It is not racist to admit this. This is an objective fact. This supports the Catholic or early Christian idea that Japhetic people came to inherit the Earth's outer regions and eventually dominate in population, warfare, and geopolitics. In fact, Y-DNA haplogroup K through T represent the largest male lineages in the world. Again, Genesis chapter 9, verse 27 shows us that God shall enlarge Japheth. There are other interpretations of this verse as well, but for the sake of time, I'm just focusing on this one. In my opinion, Y-DNA haplogroup K is the beginning of a new family lineage. It completes the picture of the biblical rise and fall of empires. Historically and biblically, the earliest civilizations are associated with Ham. That is, Y-DNA haplogroup A through E carriers represent the earliest civilizations, such as Egypt, Chaldea, Phoenicia, Ethiopia, Libya, and the like, followed by spiritual, cultural, and religious dominance from Shem. That is Y-DNA haplogroups F through J, which represent Abrahamic religions and the like. And territorial or population dominance from Japheth. That is Y-DNA haplogroup K through T, which represents global dominance, population dominance, and expanding power. This model explains why Hamitic haplogroups are older but less numerous, while Japhetic haplogroups are younger but dominate today, which is supported by real global Y-DNA statistics. In other words, Hamites laid the earliest foundations of ancient civilization, but were later overtaken and or displaced by Shemitic and Japhetic peoples. To sum this all up in a nutshell, Ham represents Y-DNA haplogroups A through E. These are the early civilization builders. They represent ancient, deep-rooted lineages in Africa and early Near East. This includes the Cushites, the children of Mizraim, Puttites, and Canaanites. They are often the first to build cities and empires. For example, Egypt, Babylon, and Canaan. Over time, these bloodlines diminished in global influence and numbers. That's why none of the haplogroups from A through E are the top dog in this world. They're not the top. Shem represents Y-DNA haplogroups F through J. These are they who established the most dominant spiritual, patriarchal, and religious legacy. This includes Semitic peoples such as the Hebrews, Arabs, and Assyrians. They brought lasting religious systems, for example, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. I'm talking about Abrahamic religions, that idea, coming from Abrahamic religions. They maintained influence in the Near East and spiritual legacy worldwide. Japheth represents Y-DNA haplogroup K through T. These are they who expanded their power globally by way of colonization and warfare. These are your warlike conquerors, the kings of the north. They include Indo-Europeans, East Asians, and Native Americans. They exploded in numbers and territorial reach, reaching into Europe, Asia, and even the Americas. Today, these haplogroups represent the largest male lineages worldwide. Y-DNA haplogroup K through T widely spreads to Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania, and Europe. This is consistent with the Japhetic dispersal. Y-DNA haplogroup K serves as a branching point for the genetic beginning of Japheth's family, seeing that Y-DNA haplogroup is a macro haplogroup. So Y-DNA haplogroup K is a macro haplogroup that all other haplogroups after it come from, and which all contribute significantly to the population boom of Eurasian peoples. In other words, Y-DNA haplogroup K is where we see a dramatic radiation of lineages associated with Japhethites and or Indo-European expansion. Some of the Y-DNA haplogroups that contributed to global dominance by way of Japhetic lineages is through Y-DNA haplogroup R1A and R1B. Within the Y-DNA haplogroup K through T lies the bloodline lineages that rule over the British Crown, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. I'm going to say that one more time. Within the Y-DNA haplogroup K through T lies the bloodline lineages that rule over the British Crown, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. So what do I mean by that? Think about it, guys. Does Y-DNA haplogroup A rule over the British Crown? No, it does not. Does Y-DNA haplogroup B or C or D or E rule over England, rule over the British Crown, rule over Washington, D.C.? You guys know it does not. Within the Y-DNA haplogroup K through T, such as R, these are the bloodlines that rule over the British Crown, that rule over Washington, D.C., over America, over Great Britain, over the United Kingdom. Remember, the British Crown rules over America. America is but a British colony. In fact, the British Crown conquered the world. The British elites are primarily Germanic. Yes, I said it. I'm going to say it again. The British elites today are primarily Germanic, and they have been for quite some time now. It's a Germanic takeover, not a Jewish takeover. It is a Germanic takeover. These people are not Jews, guys. They are, and I'm not trying to be racist, okay? They are white people, just plain and simple. Elizabeth II was former queen of the United Kingdom. She was Germanic as well. Some people want to try to beat around the bush and say, oh, she's part Germanic. Her mom is Scottish or English and her dad is Germanic. Okay, in the Bible, you are what your father is. Okay? You are what your father is. So if her paternal lineage is Germanic, she is Germanic. She is Germanic, guys. Elizabeth II was former queen of the United Kingdom. She was Germanic as well. The United Kingdom, made up of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, are ruled over primarily by Germanic families, not the Jews. Not the Jews, guys. In addition to this, the Lord Mayor's show celebrates Gog and Magog as traditional guardians of the city of London, which of course is in England, where the British crown resides. Again, Great Britain is mostly ruled over by those coming from Y-DNA haplogroup R bloodlines, such as Y-DNA haplogroup R1b, once again, not the Jews. For instance, the following English royals are coming from the Y-DNA haplogroup R category: James I, Charles I, Charles II, James II, Edward VII, George V, Edward VIII, George VI, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, Prince William, Duke of Cambridge. And do keep in mind that Y-DNA haplogroup R1b is the most prevalent haplogroup of England, home of the British crown. Once again, for the last time, this is not the Jews. This is not the Jews, guys. Most prevalent haplogroup of England, home of the British crown, is not haplogroup J. It is R. The British crown is led by Scythian and Yamnaya type people. If there are other types of people there, they are simply jumping on the Germanic bandwagon and being led by their chief Germanic leaders. In other words, their chief prince, that is Magog. And on top of all these things, the American geneticist Spencer Wells refers to Y-DNA haplogroup K as a large lineage that he calls the Eurasian clan, as opposed to Y-DNA haplogroup F, whom he refers to as the Middle Eastern clan. So, in conclusion, Japheth's sons were said to settle in Europe and Northern Asia, areas strongly represented by Y-DNA haplogroup K and other haplogroups coming from it, such as R, N, and Q. Shem's peoples in the Middle East correlate with haplogroups J, G, H, and I, which come from F, and Ham's people in Africa and nearby areas such as Arabia match up with Y-DNA haplogroups A, B, C, D, and E. With all this being said, if it can be proved that Y-DNA haplogroup I is actually Japhetic and not Shemitic, then obviously my top theory would be incorrect about Y-DNA haplogroup I. But whether or not I'm correct about Y-DNA haplogroup I am betting that Y-DNA haplogroup K all the way to T are most definitely descendants of Japheth. All right, well, that was quite a bit of info, so I'm going to stop it here. I have more reasons, guys. I really do. But like I said before, I don't want this to end up being a 10-hour video. I ain't trying to burn your guys' ears off like that. Anyhow, this is it for now. Hope y'all found this interesting. Again, I'm not forcing anybody to believe what I believe. This is just what I think. I'm open to any other theories or perspectives in relation to this topic. And I guess I'll catch you all later. Bye-bye now.